some of the things that Kristyn said, I think it might be helpful to people who are faint of heart. You're certainly up against strong opposition. I think it might be helpful to remember this. Amateurs built the Ark. Experts built the Titanic. The good news is that we already own a public bank. It's our central bank. It's called the Bank of Canada. We're all shareholders, and it's held for us in trust by our government, but it's also ours by law. The bad news is that we've been robbed. The money system has been privatized, and the money supply has been monopolized. Now, banks, of course, are all about money. And to appreciate the possibility and the potential of public banking systems, it's essential to understand something about the true nature of money. I grew up in the Depression, and one of the first things I had drummed into me about money was, money doesn't grow on trees, you know. Well, it was some decades later before I discovered that it's even easier than that. That money is created out of nothing. John Kenneth Galbraith, eminent economist, said the process by which money is created is so simple that it repels the mind. You can't believe it. And that's a big part of our problem. People can't believe it. This was confirmed, however, as the truth by none other than Graham Towers, who was our first governor of the Bank of Canada. He was meeting before a Parliament Banking and Commerce Committee, and he acknowledged these things. This is from the first governor of the Bank of Canada. 1, banks create money. They don't lend their depositors money, they create money. He said, just the way steel plants create steel, banks create money. The second thing he said was that how this works is that really it's a matter of bookkeeping entries against which people draw checks. Then he affirmed, and this is the core of our message, he affirmed, anything physically possible, that is, the materials are there to build it, the human resources are there to do the building, anything physically possible and desirable can be made financially possible, period. Thank you, Carol. About money, the nature of money. It's not a commodity. You can't eat it, you can't sell it, you can't drink it, and it sure isn't much of value in terms of an air purifier. So you can't do anything with it. Its value rests entirely in the value attributed to it by the authority responsible for producing it. Today, most of it's intangible. It's credit. It's intangible, and yet it's very, very real. It's very important. Money's a creature of law. It's not something that you have to dig out of the ground that's natural. It's something that we created. It's a creature of law. Its function as a unit of value depends entirely on what is ascribed to it by the authority responsible for it. It can be used to create or acquire wealth, but money is not wealth, and it should not be confused with wealth. It's a tool. It's a tool designed for facilitating the exchange of goods and services that we need to do in order to function as a society. Money is not the problem. It's a great invention. John Hodgson the late Dr. John Hodgson used to say, right up there with a wheel and fire. It was a great invention. The problem is that its creation and distribution have fallen into the wrong hands. The struggle over who should control a nation's money system goes way back, and the connection between monetary authority and freedom has been often very clearly recognized. Thomas Jefferson, for example, said that he feared banking institutions with the power to issue money and found them more dangerous to liberty than standing armies. As early as 1925, J.S. Wordsworth called for a nationalized system of banking and government control over the issue of currency and credit. The money supply should be managed in the national interest rather than for private profit. And in this, he said, we face the larger question of whether Parliament is to be sovereign, of whether the people are to be sovereign, or whether liberties have already been filched from us without our even knowing it. The Great Depression educated the Canadian public to the realities of money and banks in a way that would stand us in good stead today. The public level of consciousness about banks was incredibly superior to what it is today. In 1933, the Bennett government created a Royal Commission on Banking. G.G. McGeer should be in our history books as one of our heroes. How many of you have ever heard of G.G. McGeer? Good for you. Well, G.G. McGeer was very, very instrumental, of course, in the establishment and the privatization, or in the nationalization of our central bank. He appeared before this commission, and he outlined a plan for Canada, and its title was The Conquest of Poverty. He said, the prerogative of government should be used for the common good, not individual private profit. The bank, of course, went through, but there were two issues still that kept, if you read the early history of the bank, still two issues that created a lot of controversy and confusion. They were, one, should it be public or should it be private? And two, who is the supreme authority, the government or the bank? The Constitution gives Ottawa exclusive power over money, banking, and paper currency. Article 14.2 of the Bank of Canada Act established that in the case of a difference of opinion between the government and the bank must yield to the government. So, the mandate of the bank is to regulate credit and currency in the best interest of the nation. In a radio broadcast, Mackenzie King at the time said to the Canadian people, once a nation parts with control over its currency and credit, it matters not who makes that nation's laws. Usury will wreck any nation. Until the control over its currency and credit is restored to the government and recognized as its most conspicuous and sacred responsibility, all talk of the sovereignty of Parliament and of freedom is idle and futile. The Bank of Canada in 1938 was nationalized. All the private shares were bought by the government, and in Canada for a time, the question of who should create the money seemed to have been settled. They were to share it. Private banks and the Bank of Canada were to share it. Excuse me. In 1938, the bank was privatized, and the Bank of Canada demonstrated the validity of Lincoln's comment that the privilege of creating and issuing the nation's money was not just the prerogative of government, but it was its most creative opportunity. The Bank of Canada funded infrastructure projects like the Trans-Canada Highway, the St. Lawrence Seaway, and social projects like old age pension and Medicare. And they did all that without undue inflation or debt. In 1974, Canada joined the Basel Committee of the Bank for International Settlements. That committee endorsed a policy of governments not borrowing from their own central banks, but borrowing instead at compound interest, of course, from private banks. By 2012, Canadians had paid over $1 trillion in interest on that account. Twice its national debt, greater than the cost of health care, greater than the cost of seniors' entitlements, greater than any other single thing. Interest, $1.1 trillion just in interest. The banks get the profit, we get something called austerity. The 2012 budget, Canadian budget, did this. It chopped 19,200 jobs from the public sector. Federal programs were slashed by $5.2 billion a year. And this was all justified by an unnecessary debt, a deliberate debt. Money matters. It's the lifeblood of the economy. Too little and the system collapses. Too much and it loses its value, and again, the system fails. How money is created and distributed also matters. Basically, there are two kinds of money: government-created money and bank-created money. The most important distinction between the two is that only the government can create legal tender, essentially debt-free money, cash or credit. What the private banks create is sometimes called promise-to-pay money, because essentially what they do is that they substitute their promise to pay, which is accepted as money, for your promise to pay, which is not. Other differences, as I say, are outlined in the leaflet. Money is created when the bank issues a loan, and it's destroyed when that loan is paid. You pay it back, so the money supply is instant. Every time you pay it back, money disappears from the system. So the money system and the money supply is always in flux, and this is a cause of instability that's a real problem with that system. Most money today exists as debt. The debt grows faster than income because we have so many ways of creating debt, but income's harder to come by. When the debt so exceeds the income that debtors are unwilling or unable to pay and cannot borrow more, then even they may not simply be able to keep up the interest payments. Then banks grow unwilling to lend, and the instability then is devastating because we don't have enough money in the economy to keep it going. There are all kinds of other flaws in the system, and one of its characteristics, of course, is the boom-bust that we're all so familiar with. You have a boom, bang, you have a bust. And these booms and busts have become more frequent and more disastrous over the last few years. A more serious problem with the debt money system is really now catching up with us. Since approximately 97% of today's money supply is debt money, the only way to expand the supply is to increase the debt And this makes growth an imperative. The system has to either grow or die. The weakness of our present system, since the exploitation of which now is threatening the very life of the planet on which we live. As Naomi Klein argues so well, this changes everything. As she points out, our economic system and our planetary system are at war. What the climate needs to avoid collapse is a contraction in our use of resources. What our economic system demands is unfettered expansion. And financially, economist Michael Hudson has, in a recent article, explained that, I'm getting the words. In a recent article, he explained we've gone as far as we can go in fueling the economy with debt. Over the past 3 or 4 years, successive Canadian governments have abdicated their responsibilities under the Constitution and the Bank of Canada Act and surrendered our central bank to the money lenders. We must regain control of our currency and credit. To this end, COMER has filed suit in the federal court, and Rocco Galati will be here later this afternoon to discuss the matter. I'm going to skip to what I think is very important context for us to understand at the moment. Einstein said we can't expect to solve our problems at the same level at which we created them. And this idea about the need to rise to a new level of thinking is being expressed often and by all kinds of people. So, for example, what are the sorts of things that we need to rethink? We need to rethink, for example, money. Money belongs to us. We own it. We invented it. We can change it. It's a commons, and we all have a right to it. The government is, the recovery of that is up to us. It is ours to take back. Remember, again, this essential truth. Anything that is physically possible and desirable can be made financially possible. What we cannot do is to trash the planet to keep that system going. What we cannot do is to trash our young people, which we're also doing, in the interest of this system. Tax. Fiscal policy is only one of two main tools that the government has to manage the economy. The most important one is monetary policy, which we never hear of because it's a taboo subject. Like Voldemort in Harry Potter, you just don't mention it. The monetary policy controls the creation and distribution of money. And Joseph Stiglitz, eminent economist, has said the monetary policy is the key determinant of the success of your economic system. And we don't talk about it. Youngins won't talk about it. Nobody will talk about it. And 20 years ago, COMER was the only voice in the wilderness talking about the need for monetary and economic reform. What is work? What is so ennobling and wonderful about work that we should spend our lives learning how to earn a living, and then, if you're lucky, working to earn a living? We need to rethink work, particularly since work is disappearing to a great extent because of the development of our technology. Let's put life before work. Why work most of your life and devote your life to work? Life has to be more than that. How about a shorter work week, shorter days? Death. Particularly, the most outstanding example of the immorality, the unthinkable, outrageous effect of this system is our student debt. We have done terrible things to our students. They are graduating debt slaves. When I went to university, I went for 5 years, and when I graduated, I didn't owe a cent. And that's the way it was, and that's the way it can be, and that's the way it should be. When the University of Toronto has to establish a service for students who are seriously considering suicide, that is a smoking gun. That is absolutely an indictment against us. How could we ever have allowed this to happen? I don't have time to do what to go on with what I would like us to have a chance to discuss. We'll have to do that again another time. But I would like to suggest that what we're about is not revolution. What we're about is evolution. Rising to a new level of thinking about everything, and everything is interrelated, and everything has to change. We, I think, are suffering through an evolutionary kick in the pants. And either we will wake up and move on, or we're done. Thank you.
So everyone picked up the handout investor protection, that's right. Does anybody not have it? This is a cartoon. I don't hear any laughter. I will give you a brief explanation of what this financial information is. I was first of all asked to introduce myself a few minutes ago anyway. So do I have 1 minute to introduce myself? Please give me permission. Okay, my background is quite diverse. Was a university professor for quite a few years in 4 different universities, 1 in the States, 3 in Canada. I went from there into investigative accounting, have testified in court endless times about things that I'll mention to you. We also have an equity research firm, and therefore we put out buy, sell, hold on everything. So why was I asked to come here today? Think about how much money is sitting in pension funds across Canada. So one of the issues is where do you get the money to have this type of banking? Well, it's sitting right there in Canada. And so everybody in this room, unless you're an alien, is hooked up with Canada Pension Plan, with various in-house pensions, with various government pensions, and so on. How many are of the impression that those are well managed? Does anybody notice any hands? How many are of the impression that there's a lot of cleanup necessary? How many are too tired to put up their hands? All right, trying to get an idea here. So anyway, here we start with a joke. I'll go on to the next one. So at business school, they voted me most likely to succeed, and for a while there I did. To make a long story short, the generally accepted accounting practices weren't as generally accepted as I thought. Same old story, I started running around with the wrong crowd and I became a CEO. Well, thanks or otherwise. Okay, at the back of your handout is what's going to start appearing on the screen, and then we'll move to the front of the handout. So I'm not too sure what page it is, but let's take this as an example of what goes on in Canada. Like, I've done hundreds of these types of cases against directors, officers, auditors, and so on, and some defending them when I think they are fairly charged. So here we have something called Sino-Forest products. The issue is all of that was taking place in China and the British Virgin Islands. Had nothing to do with Canada. But where did they raise their money? From you, the donors, here in Canada. And I use the word donors carefully, simply because that's what you were doing. You sure as heck weren't investing. So if we look at it, I'm going to quickly go through and describe what a set of financial statements is. Yeah, good. So in that situation, back up just to the balance sheet. So the balance sheet is, in simple terms, if you own a condo or a house or something, the assets are the condo, the cost, value, whatever it happens to be. The mortgage is the liability. What's left over then is your particular equity in that business. There we go. Okay, now look at the situation. So this went through 4 different sets of auditors over some, like 12 years. 4 different sets in 2 cities in Canada and in Hong Kong. And if you think that everything is wonderful and so on, let me show you how absurd this stuff can get. So if you look at the balance sheet, and the crucial parts are 1 and 2. So 1 then, in what they call the longer-term asset, is an investment in timber and so on. So when you see $3 billion sitting there, and you're saying to yourself, compare that against 2, which is inventory. Inventory is like the stuff ready for sale. Then you're saying to yourself, wow, what kind of business can this be? And your conclusion is, well, it has to be a tree farm, because they have no intentions of selling much inventory, and it's going to have to grow and grow and grow and grow. And therefore, in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, they'll sell the timber tracts or whatever it happens to be. So, looking at just the balance sheet, you say to yourself, fair enough. If that's what I'm investing in, then remember, I'll get a return on investment, but it'll be 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Any questions on that so far? Because I'm entitling you to ask questions before you fall asleep. I need the feedback to know whether you're following what I'm doing. So as we move down the page, we cross over to the next one, we come to this thing, statement of income. Income then is like if you're selling, and there's a cost, and then you have various expenses to pay. What's left over? And it's that what's left over that should be a dividend that you get your return on investment. That's the theory behind it. Well, let's look at this crazy thing. So what have you got? You've got sales revenue of a couple of $2 billion. So how are you going to have this particular tree farm suddenly have its trees grow overnight, and you cut them down and you sell it? Like, it's the absurdity of the absurdity. This went through 4 sets of auditors. All right, so what is going on to have this type of thing happen? As we push on with it, we go to this cash statement. So the cash statement is supposed to say, okay, there's this fancy stuff going on with the income statement where they can play games, and we'll come back to that. But what does this cash statement show? Well, what it shows is 3 categories. One's called your operating results, which is a reflection of cash and income. Another one is how you finance. Another one is how you invest. So what are the stock market prices and so on highly tied into? It's the top one. We know that because we're churning out our own reports on the day that the big banks and so on are saying, buy, buy, buy. We're saying, run! And this goes on all the time. So they're trying to sell securities for the client. We're trying to tell our clients, no, this one stinks, go away. So we look at this thing, and you're going to have the analysts, the way they are trained, and don't forget I have a strong education background, so I fight with these guys all the time. And I say, stop telling the analysts to disbelieve the numbers, because that's what they do. We have them in our office. When they see me walking towards them, they hide. Because they know I'm going to give them a hard time. So in this situation, look what they've done. They've called something $746 million depletion. Well, what the heck is depletion? If you are a steel mill and you're wearing down your assets, what's the consequence? The consequence is it's the cost of earning the revenue. Therefore, you say, here's the revenue, here are the various costs I'm incurring, what's left over is income. So, am I a success? Am I a failure? I'm looking at that income figure to try to tell me how well or poorly I'm doing. So, if you have the analysts, instead of looking at the income statement, focus on this top part of the operating activities. And what have you done? You've managed to take what we'll call a fake income to start with. So you can see the calculation in mid-page where it talks about the 840. And then we subtract this non-cash depletion. The real cash, and you can't call it real because the income statement wasn't so great to start with. But suddenly you've gone from 840 down to 93, and in that particular sense, that makes all the difference in the world in the price of the stock. What were the analysts doing? They were using the big top number. And you can go back and look at this. So, by 2011, because this is 2010 material, somebody in the U.S. said, this is a fraud. And so that stock eventually vanished. And there were people paying fortunes for this, and it's gone. How many of these types of activities do I encounter in a year? Anybody want to pick a number?
1,000.
Yeah, and how many are you invested in? That's the problem. That's exactly the problem. How often do you see the media? And we wrote for 10 years in Canadian business once a month, because that's when it came out. Wrote for 5 years in the National Post. We're now writing steadily once a month in these investor publications. And how many people are listening? Any ideas? Almost nobody. You can go back and look at when we called the failure in Nortel a couple of years in advance. We told people, get the heck out of the income trusts. They're Ponzi frauds. Not all of them, but quite a few. How many people paid attention. So you're saying this money that's floating around, that is in the pension plan, and what is it that they're investing in? They gave $105 million like a year and a bit ago to one of the ones that we thought was a horrible investment in the extreme. 105 of your money. Where's it going? Wave it goodbye. And this type of stuff is where you're getting your money invested. We have gone to the governments across Canada for fun. I send them registered letters every year or so just to see if they're still asleep. And of course, they are. And on that particular basis, you say to them, look, here's what's going on. What are you doing about it? And you talk about no particular action taking place on some of your fronts, the same thing that we have. And they don't attack the ideas, they attack me personally. So this goes on all the time. So are there any quick questions you have on Sino Forest? If you look around, yes.
How come they don't charge the charge like that?
Why are they not charged? Because no one cares.
The regional areas,
Pardon?
regional areas don't any charge.
Not in Canada. How many of the big scams in Canada were prosecuted out of the U.S.? Like most of them. We don't have an organization. So now let's backtrack a bit. If you look at Canada Revenue Agency and you think of their empire, and I'm being nice, I've done a lot of work for them and against them and so on, but you have these massive income tax acts and regulations and interpretation bulletins. They've got a tax court, they've got an appeal court, they have tons of litigation lawyers and so on. Massive, massive empire, because the government somehow wants to collect taxes. I can look at the city of Toronto as they police the parking in my neighborhood. There are just about always 2 cars going around ticketing people up, down, and sideways, and I sort of kid them along occasionally, ask them how business is. But the thing is, here you have that situation, it is being policed, and they try to follow up. Where is the policing in the stock market? Go try find it. Occasionally you get insider trading charges, but for the most part. We even had a case where we had in Switzerland, not only the names of the people, but the bank account numbers and the secret accounts. And this was all presented to the 3 levels of police around here. And nothing happens, of course. Then I get a letter from one of the top people saying, why don't I pursue this a bit more at my expense and go to Switzerland and get mugged and so on. Like, I'm supposed to be doing this. What the heck is your job? So we pretty much give up in trying to work with the authorities because you just get slaughtered in terms of time wasters and things like that. So there we have that side. What is the equivalent side for investors? Anybody know? Well, we have a document that came out a few months ago called, generally by the people, the National Security Commission, except for Quebec and Alberta. In there, they come up with self-regulation. So we'll flip over here too. So let's back up. How did we get into this mess? And it started, in my mind, with the 1929 stock market crash. So I was a graduate student in the U.S., and as a project part of my degree, I looked at the banking system and I looked at the publications and so on from 1920 to 1929, 30, and so on. fascinating if you ever want to go through that stuff, but you have to get a decent library that has those back issues. But what is interesting about it is very similar to what's going on today, and I'll come to this in a few minutes. But what did we do in Canada? The U.S. set up their Securities and Exchange Commission 1933, 1934, and set up this group equivalent, I guess, to Canada Revenue Agency and taxation and so on. What did Canada do? They trusted self-regulation. All right, what does that mean? It means giving everybody in jail the keys to the jail. And then they can regulate themselves. They can come in and spend a few hours in jail, and then they can go somewhere else. You think I'm joking, too cynical? No. No. So, in that period between 29 and about 1970-72, who was setting the rules for financial reporting in Canada? The auditors. All right, so you're an auditor. How tough are you going to make the rules? How miserable are you going to make your life? Anybody care to guess? If it was you, what would you do? Easy as possible. So this is what was going on. There were some good people, and I worked with them. I worked with all of these big accounting firms at one time or another, consulting, if not other stuff. And they tried hard to convince the used car salesman type to not be this nasty. But who won the battle come 1980? There's a recession in that 80, 82, and so on was pretty bad. And the cowboys won out over the farmers, as they called it. So what happened after that? If you look a bit more down the slide, look at this long list, 1980 to 95, of the failures in Canada. Hercules Management is the leading case in Canada. We'll come to it in a bit. Northland Bank, most of those ones were cases I did in court, not all of them though. All right, so where does this take us? You can see as we get into point number 4, we're into Nortel and Livent and the business income trust and so on. So what do we notice about this period of time? Nothing is improving. Things are getting much worse. If you think about it, people ask me, well, which political party is the best to resolve this? Forget it. They're equally ignorant, perhaps, uninterested. It doesn't attract votes, whatever you want to call it. So again, think, there's your pension money, and it's being fleeced whether you like it or not. How much? It's a function of how good your money managers are. I'm about to embark on where we totally sold out. So let's flip over to the next page. The U.S. calls IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standards, a race to the bottom. They were so unimpressed with it that they have dragged their feet on doing anything with it. Who embraced it 100%? Take a wild guess. The mayor. It says right here, you're the mayor. Canada! We could see this coming. We had a 4-part series in the National Post, ran like Tuesday to Friday, I think it was. We're saying, are we out of our minds? This is a big step down. So you have for years this whole problem of self-regulation, not being too loose, not being for sure too tight, trying to stay in the middle. And it was tough on the auditors. You can't blame them, but there it is. Then who brought this IFRS to Canada? The auditors. So this is deregulation in the extreme. They threw out a lot of stuff. Now, I have probably had a dozen cases in the banking sector of major collapses like Northland Bank and so on. And what do they do there? They decide we're going to give money to, like, Montreal Eaton Centre was one of the big losses. And these guys in Montreal Eaton Centre don't have the money to pay the interest and the principal. So what do the financial institutions do? They increase the amount of the loan on the balance sheet, and they show revenue on interest coming in. No cash, zero. And it gets higher and higher and higher. So what do? You go to some appraiser, and in one situation, we had a hilarious incident. We were looking at the appraiser's credentials, and we noticed there were 2 years in there that he doesn't say what he was doing. So a couple of us joked, he's probably in jail. Well, 6 months or so later, that's where we found out he was. So these guys are inclined to vary considerably in their ethics. There are some excellent ones, reliable ones, but there are a lot of other people who will sell out for a nickel. So they just kept going higher and higher and higher appraisers on these properties. They had up $350 million from what I remember on that particular case. And then what happened? The institution collapses. What did they sell that one for? $103 million. So you had not even the first mortgage got covered. 0 second, 0 third, 0 fourth. Total loss. Who absorbed the loss? Take a guess. Look at your neighbor. You're the people who are picking this thing up. So there it is. Now, what is this IFRS? It was sold to Canada and advertised endlessly as principles-based. Go and try to find those principles. I'm in the business. I have to testify in court. I can't find them. They look like they were borrowed out of the U.S. They had a concept series. They are saying how great this stuff is for Canada. Right, let me give you a situation I'm working on right now. It's a pipeline. Not the main one you're thinking of, but it's a pipeline. And when you look at what's there, you say to yourself, okay, how did they get to be such a big pipeline? Well, they bought other companies. When you look at their balance sheet, and I didn't bring it here, probably should have, but anyway, when you look at their balance sheet, they have pipeline plant and equipment, and then they have $200 million of what they call goodwill. So if you buy another pipeline, what is it you're buying? You're buying a pipeline, but they're calling it goodwill. So we're sitting there, we're going to have a conversation with these guys in a few weeks. We're sitting there saying, just a minute, what did you do? You went and interviewed the rabbits and said, will you stay away from my pipeline? And the same with the deer and everything else. Like, what could goodwill possibly be? They say it's relationships. With what? The trees? And this stuff is all audited. I had a big case out in Alberta last spring. What did they have there? They invented their revenue. And they said it's under IFRS. It allows it. So IFRS allows you to increase your loans even though you get no new cash. The real scam of all right now is that interesting? Take an attendance maybe. The real scam there is you can be an executive of a company in Canada and you can buy property in your own name, sell it to the public company on the Toronto Stock Exchange at 50% higher, and who gets the profit? You do. This is called self-dealing or related party transactions. When IFRS came in, they lessened the lousy rules we had before. And you've had a few cases go to court in Canada where the judges have just ignored this. They're saying directors and officers are allowed to make a profit. But where is it coming from? It comes from your pension fund. So this is going on. How often do you see in the media discussions about the things I'm talking about? Never? Couple of you said. 1987 was the last year in which public inquiries were held on financial failures. Right? And this was the Alberta situation, principal group. So why did these disappear? We're now 28 years. Yes?
Well, I think the answer to that, one of the reasons why these things are disappearing is because you have what we call the OMERS Pension Fund, which is the Ontario Municipal Employees Pension Fund. And now the Ontario government has allowed through their 3Ps partnerships, okay, that has actually cost Ontario taxpayers $8.5 billion to implement. And what's happening now is that OMERS will now be dealing with the economic development in most of all of the communities, which is actually insider trading.
Okay, thank you. All right, so these are the situations. Who owns most of the big investment houses? Right? You know that. You're talking about offshore banking, money laundering, and things of that nature. Why are the real estate prices what they are in Toronto? Can we say there's even 1% money laundering on those? 10%? Where is that number? I don't know. It's hard to trace. But we're crazy if we think it's zero. So, any questions other on this IFRS is a disaster. So you have, again, the legislation saying, let's set up a National Securities Commission. Right in there, and this is where I stopped reading it. Wait fast, it wasn't close enough that I got a three-pointer. But it talks about self-regulation. So the point that has caused most of our problems is being brought in by the lobby groups. Who else would do that? No other observations? Okay, so let's go down a bit more. IFRS assumes that people are 100% honest. You have all sorts of comments in there. If in doubt, let management decide. What does that mean? Management decide. So the auditor says, oh, that's great. We reduced our liabilities by bringing in IFRS. We also got a lot of great fees by converting people from our old system to the new system. And you just try to find, in the last 5 years, people who are seriously pointing this out. How many believe that I could sell myself right now to at least 1,000 CROOKS in Canada and show them how to beat the system? A couple of believers. You got the money? You know, this stuff is child's play. Let's take some of the systems in Canada like Rogers and so on, and you have the boxes for your TV. And in that situation, you say, okay, is this just an expense? Like, is it too trivial? So let's just put it on the income statement as an expense, kiss it goodbye. Believe it or not, there are companies in Canada who say, nope, it's an asset. So they put it on their balance sheet. And then, like Sino-Forest, they expense it over a few years. So what does that do? It allows something that was a cash expenditure to be converted into a non-cash expenditure. Mickey Mouse stuff for a first-year accounting student. Mickey Mouse. What did the analysts in Canada do? We found maybe 1, 2 out of, say, 15 who said, gee, that's a problem. Because what it does is it increases the cash, as with good old Sino-Forest, and therefore they put a multiple on it, and therefore there's a higher price. So we put out these suggestions to our clients, saying, stay away from these companies. What happens? The rest of the people say, oh, it went down a bit. It's a buying opportunity. How often have you heard that? How often have you heard the people on TV and so on talk about earnings per share? How many think that I can cook earnings in most companies by 10, 15% either way? Think about it. This is easy stuff. So how do we get some of you to say, I've got to join in, because it ties right into your subject here. I want that money that's going into the pensions and so on directed to other people and, of course, used as part of your system. Because right now you have the Ontario government says, oh, we're going to set up this new pension plan for Ontario. So a couple of us said, let's have a bit of fun. We'll send a few registered letters to the politicians, and we'll say to them, have you thought about maybe you're just donating more money to the CROOKS? How many replies did we get? 0, 0, 0. They're not paying attention. So. All right, any questions about this IFRS? This is bad news. It's a situation where the auditors have now sold out to the other side. They're saying, management, go do what you want. We have various things in here. You see, we did a book a few years ago called Swindlers, where we're trying to point these things out. Canadian sales of any book are abysmal, as most people know. So this, again, joined the abysmal crowd. Okay, no questions.
I have one.
You have one.
One moment, please.
I can speak from here. I got a loud voice.
No, you don't.
Yes, I do.
We're recording it.
Is your mother an auditor or something like that?
No.
Okay.
She's a very humble lady in the widow, and I'm a humanitarian and a caregiver. Why are we asleep?
Because we are Canadians. We are afraid to speak our mind. We were trained. How much fun did I have teaching graduate students and so on at one of the places at York University? And you keep on telling them, business schools have their pluses and minuses. A big minus is you're fed BS. How many of them listen? Is it going to be on the exam, sir? Like, what do you do? What's your opinion?
Well, we could talk for hours here. I've been figuring this out for all my life, and as a scholar, researcher, just a human being, and one who wants to love humanity and do my part and make a difference, it starts inside, and it starts at, it's about awakening and putting out that love and that light and letting go of all this nonsense that we've been told. But in love and forgive yourself, it's a spiritual journey, and trying to not let our emotions take us for a ride and really understand what love and truth is and where it really comes from and who we really are in the first place, why we were created. And what's our purpose here?
So you can be the next speaker.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have 2 copies of the book.
One you got for free, and
These do work if anybody wants to use them.
I borrowed the first one, and when I took it back to the library, I told them, don't let this out of the library because it'll be stolen. Because I had gone to Chapters, which is run by a Bilderberger, and whose partner in crime is Gary Schwartz, owner. And so it wasn't in stock at Chapters, and so I ordered it. 5 months later, I got a letter from Chapters saying, no, but you can get your money back if you do this. So I have treated your book as almost sacred source of accurate analysis, because I'm an independent investment analyst.
oh, good.
And this is one of my Bibles right here. And your list of 50 Canadian companies that are fraudulent, all the way from Rieps to Nortel. I point that out to people, and I show my investors I only know of 3 Canadian investments that are public investments that I think can be trusted, the numbers that they give you. 3.
So you'll have to tell me later what the 3 are. I don't get that high.
I've just been informed that the microphones on the desks work, so I'll stay up in the gallery here.
Okay,
We have a question over here.
you mentioned that in 1929 the stock market crashed and the SEC was started in 33, 34. Is that correct?
Securities and Exchange Commission Acts are 1933 and
Yeah. Why is Canada registered as a company on the American Securities and Exchange Commission as a corporation under UCC law?
Why do they?
Yeah.
To get access to a larger market. So that if you sell in Canada, there are only so many quote donors, and if you want to find some new suckers in the U.S. and so on.
What kind of corporation is it? Is it considered a charitable trust?
No, the ones listed on the New York Stock Exchange.
On the Securities and Exchange Commission.
The Securities and Exchange Commission is the national oversight body in the U.S.
Right, so why is Canada listed as a corporation, and what type of corporation is it with the American Securities and Exchange?
I would have to look at the documents offhand, I don't know.
Do you know anything about the bankruptcy laws that were in 1931, 32, 33, and the reestablishment of Canada from the Hudson Bay Company? The conversion there, and the resulting birth certificates that were...
If I looked at it, it's some umpteen years ago.
So you're not aware?
Well, tell me what I'm missing.
Why is Canada listed as a corporation on the American Securities and Exchange Commission, and Ontario, actually,
They're
the province
not
of Ontario?
listed, they're registered with.
Sorry?
The listing would have to be to a stock exchange. You got your terminology. It's confusing me a bit. They're 2 different animals.
Right, so you don't know?
Well, without looking at, I'll give you a card and you can email me and we can follow up on it.
Okay.
But you're running 2 things together and you got to separate those on your question.
No, I'm just wondering when the country became a business, and why? How there seems to be a conversion now from the actual people or creditors to now customers, or i.e. legal persons, that are now responsible for paying debt instead of the ones that should be credited with the resources of Canada, the landmass, not Canada, the corporation that's registered on the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Okay, you're running about 5 things together. We'll talk later.
Certainly.
It's just, whoever is advising you there is not giving you good advice. There's somebody over there? Yeah.
I think I can speak to a little bit about what this woman is commenting about. I don't know if anyone in the room is familiar with what the banking system does when somebody is born and their parents sign a live birth certificate, whereby the birth certificate is then securitized, monetized, and under public policy, human beings are used as the backing for the currency. There's no longer gold backing the currency. And in fact, what most people consider as their government are private corporations.
Exactly. Why?
So just like the gentleman first said, why are we asleep? And then Al, you made the comment, which in my mind alluded to compartmentalization. For example, when I started to go to medical school 10 years ago, I needed to get that money from somewhere. I got the loan. I didn't know at the time that I was actually the creditor, and the bank wasn't loaning me anything. It was my signature that was creating the fund.
Yeah,
They would then convince me they were loaning me.
yeah, it was guaranteed though.
In medical school, physicians are not taught about nutrition. In law school, attorneys are not taught law. They're taught statutes, ordinances, codes that corporations create, et cetera, and so forth. So in many sections of society, I think this is how it's occurring, and the sleep that this gentleman alluded to is perpetuated.
There's no question that we're not educating at university, and I used to get in tremendous fights on that type of thing. Memorization was given like 90% in some courses. 10% was maybe split up into a few things. 2% was thinking and so on. It's ridiculous. And this is, like I said, 3 Canadian universities and 1 in the U.S. Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to simply point out, just for fun, I read Donovan Waters' Law of Trusts in Canada text. And I'm reading Chapter 19, Day-to-Day Conduct of the Trust. And in that text, he points out simply that whether by right of Canada or the provinces, the Crown was actually set up for a charitable purpose, as a charitable trust for the public benefit. And I don't know if Councillor Wong-Tam remembers, there's a speech given by Janet Leiper here last May, and where she simply pointed out that to all the councillors to remember and to be careful in dealing and handling with the people's trust and resources. This is all one big, if you read the British North America Act, they talk about purposes because of the objects of the trust can either be beneficiaries, which are persons, or purposes. This is all one big charitable trust that's being run for us, and we don't realize we're the beneficiaries because the Lord Eldon Principle says the concept of the trust was the fundamental function to have a beneficiary to enforce it. We don't realize who we are. We're actually the beneficiaries of this trust, and we have to be the ones to enforce it. So when you point out how come nobody says anything, because we don't know who we are, we're the ones that have to, because there's a maximum law, the law aids the vigilant, not those who sleep or slumber on their rights. It's up to us to enforce all this. Make friends with the Attorney General's office.
I believe we have another question from the floor over here somewhere, was it? There you go.
Okay, do you have a website or anything like that? Because I like a lot of what you're talking about, but I've never heard of you before. And have you ever considered going on, I'm not sure if you've heard of it, Matt Kaiser on RT? He has a lot of guys on like you in the UK to talk about the frauds the Bank of Scotland is doing and all the frauds that are going on there. And when they appear on his program, that puts a lot of pressure on the government to do something.
Well, I appear a lot on TV and so on, but maybe not with the right people. So we can talk later about that.
Agent.
Okay, I want to get over here to try to,
One more?
yeah.
You don't mind?
I just have one sentence here. It was Friedman that told everybody on his deathbed that the Federal Reserve, so-called, caused the Depression. These things do not happen, they are planned. And whether we win or lose, they always make money. I'm Sydney White, a lot of my students are here. Nice seeing you. And I just thought I'd add that because I think people need to know that we've sold ourselves to that organization, which is private and very, very greedy.
Proceed.
Is that it? I got 5 minutes left, hopefully I'll be fast. Let me get on to where you're being conned now quite a bit. So, Nortel had an interesting game, and we used to kid them, and I've said this on TV, that a lot of the creativity in Nortel was in their accounting department. This, of course, doesn't go over very well, but that was the reality. So, Nortel said, look, we're losing money according to your accounting rules, and we have to pay these executives and motivate them. So they came up with the idea of what they called pro forma profits. And pro forma profits were, in essence, don't count a bunch of expenses. Don't count it. And therefore you magically rose from a loss to a profit. And you magically then paid a big chunk of that to the executives. We were screaming and yelling at the time about this problem, and when Nortel was starting to collapse, there were some minor changes made in Canada. Well, a lot of people thought, wow, nothing was really done about that. Let's create our own, all these adjusted EBITDA, embedded margin, and all that type of stuff. So right now in Canada, going on are a bunch of those same creations. EBITDA means earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. So it's very similar to what I showed you with Sino-Forest. In that situation then, what people are doing is they're saying, aha, I can make the adjustments I want, and nobody is policing this. So that you have people then who are not counting a whole bunch of marketing costs and things of that nature. And as a consequence, they have these fatter profits. And the situation then is, with these fatter profits, I will then fake dividends to you. So a game that has been going on, I've talked about it a few times on TV, is look at these dividends you're getting. Canadians are falling right into the trap and saying, here, I'm getting this great dividend, it's a wonderful company, I'm going to get it forever. And on one company, they've reduced their dividend 3 times, the stock is down 50%, and we still haven't pushed it down to 0 at this point. But there they have it. If the profits are fake, you've got a Ponzi scheme. And Ponzi schemes are prevalent right across Canada. Major problem. We have them part of other situations. If you really want to know how much money, cash is available for paying dividends and so on, you have to subtract the replacement capital wearing down of your equipment and so on. Many companies are making that close to a 0 figure. So this stuff is absolutely BS. Yes. If you want to look at most of the bank lending documents, which we usually see in bankruptcy and so on, the bank's loan has a percentage multiple of adjusted EBITDA. I've done presentations to bankers, and you try to tell them, let me show you. I can cook right in front of you. So one time I used to ask these lending people, tell me who your clients are, and I'll be polite and I won't use them as examples and rub it into you. So I'll pick other companies. And it doesn't matter. They turn around on the next loan, and who are they lending to? Some bozo who's created that mess. Have I got, what, a minute and a half left? So if you look at those pages in your handout, you can see where I've set up a whole bunch of other sort of dirty tricks. And if you check with on your computer and Google our firm, you can see where we're at, articles on it. All right, look at this next list in 4. So who do you think is protecting you?
No one.
There's tons of commercials where it says, get a second opinion. Yeah, get a second opinion that's as stupid as your first. And my wife gets angry with me when on some of the actors who come up doing this type of thing. Remember, they're just actors. I say, yeah, luckily I'm not live with them. But all the way through this type of stuff, there are problems. There are excellent judges in Ontario, and there are a bunch of others. And if you don't work out who you're dealing with and don't understand it, you can easily lose a case. So that turns people off. Castor Holdings was written up in the Globe and Mail a couple of days ago. This was a case that I was involved in for 17 years.
Wow.
It's now slipping into 23 years, but looks like it's finally winding up. I testified in Montreal court for 20 and a half days on this thing. The legal costs were probably $750 million. And they're settling this thing for $220 million. A lot of those people who lost money, like Chrysler and so on, the banks in Europe just got fed up. Over that period of time, a lot of people died. That tactic of wearing people down and hoping they die is a Canadian standby for the defense lawyers. My last comment is, look across the lawyers of Canada. How many of the big firms are defense lawyers? Huge. The imbalance in this country is just unbelievable. The plaintiff lawyers can be small shops. It's a tough job. You need the money to go up against the civil. So try to recover your pension money. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to take a 15-minute break. We have literature in the members' lounge up at that corner.